What's going on, you guys? It's Shiraz Ahmed coming at you with some more financial and business content. Given that this week is International Women's Day on March the 8th, I want to discuss ARK Invest, their ETF ARK-K, and of course, shine some spotlight on Cathie Wood, ARK CEO. If you like the content that I'm creating, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. I'm also uploading new content every week, so if you hit the bell icon, you'll be notified the next time I upload a piece. All right, so let's jump in. Now, anytime we talk about any sort of investments as a licensed professional, unlike a lot of the other people out here on YouTube, I do need to give my obligatory disclaimer, which is number one, past performance is not indicative of future performance. Just because something did do well, that doesn't mean that it's going to, or vice versa. Number two, investing in stocks can be risky and it may not always be suitable for all people, so you really need to be careful. And number three, make sure that you do your own due diligence, and if you're ever unsure, this is why you may want to consider contacting a professional. Okay, obligatory disclaimer done. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. So being a girl dad and the fact that March the 8th of 2021 is International Women's Day, I thought it would be kind of interesting to talk about the absolutely amazing run that ARK Invest and their CEO, Cathie Wood, has been on. She's had a meteoric rise in the media over the past year and is constantly in the news and making headlines and being heralded, frankly, as the Warren Buffett, so to speak, for growth stocks. So before we get into the ARK-K ETF, I think it's important to shine the spotlight on Cathie Wood. As CEO of ARK Invest, she's also the firm's chief investment officer and has had an impressive career that spans over the past 40 years. Starting in the early days as an assistant economist for a capital group, to later on founding a hedge fund and managing over 800 million, to finally becoming the chief investment officer for global thematic strategies at AllianceBernstein, which is one of the world's largest investment managers. She's had an absolutely amazing track record. She's succeeded, frankly, where many have failed, both men and women, and has frankly become a visionary leader and ultimately an example for women in the financial industry aspiring to become portfolio managers, economists, and even CEOs. So kudos to her for kind of paving the way for a lot of others. Okay, so that's a little bit about Cathie, who's awesome. She's created a really unique company in ARK Invest, and an example of that uniqueness is in ARK Innovations ETF, or ARK-K. The mandate of the fund is to track disruptive innovation and focus its attention on companies that are paving the way forward with new technology, but also can be fairly controversial and also volatile. For those of you who aren't familiar with what an ETF is, this stands for Exchange Traded Fund. This is a type of security that tracks an index, a sector, a commodity, or any other asset. What makes them unique is that they can be purchased or sold on the stock exchange, and just like you would any other regular stock. So in essence, they look and smell like a stock, but they're actually a fund or a basket of securities that are traded on an exchange. Okay, so that's a little bit about what an ETF is. Intuitively thinking, and especially in the early days, ETFs were effectively a passive index type product. Like think of the SPY or the VOO, which exist to track and pretty much mirror the S&P 500. ARK-K, on the other hand, is a fairly unique and really more of an active ETF, which is a more recent innovation in the financial industry, where they do actually a lot of fundamental research and they actually actively trade their positions. So it's really different than what you would think of with a basic index type product or an index tracker. So one of the unique ways that ARK takes a more active approach is kind of really embodied in how their analysts conduct their research. So at conventional investment management firms, most analysts have a mandate to cover a specific sector. So let's say automotive or energy or mining, etc. At ARK, on the other hand, they're actually reorganized to cover different, what they call innovation platforms, regardless of sector. So think of like AI or artificial intelligence, genomics, robotics, etc. And what's cool about it is that they actually routinely intersect and collaborate when they're doing the research, and that's actually not commonplace in the investment industry. Usually an analyst will cover their specific sector and very rarely ever touch on anything else. So this is a different lens to look at the investment world, and this has actually enabled ARK to evaluate securities in a different way, and they've, as a result, had some pretty big wins, which is pretty cool. Okay, so Who cares? I mean, a lot of investments can have a good run. What's the big deal about ARK and ARK-K specifically? Well, in the last 52 weeks, ARK-K has returned a whopping 130% as of the date of filming this video. And the S&P during that same time frame has done about 58%. Now, both of these are absolutely fantastic returns and should by no means be considered to be normal rates of return that you can expect in your life, but by any stretch of the imagination. That said, ARK-K has consistently, frankly, outperformed the S&P 500 since its inception. And what's cool about it is that this has been done all while having very little to no exposure to the conventional FANG stocks. And for those of you who don't know, FANG stands for Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. So basically, it's outperformed while having a composition that's really different than the S&P. Now, you could also argue that the S&P is not a fair comparison because it is kind of an apples and oranges, which is reasonable. But intuitively speaking, most people think of the S&P and say that's the benchmark that I'm either trying to achieve or surpass, etc. So to summarize, ARK is led by Cathie Wood, who is a very accomplished investor in her own right and has developed a company with a really unique way of looking at the world. At the moment, ARK-K is having its time in the sun, and like all things, eventually it'll have its time in the shade where it won't be making headlines and perhaps it won't be the flavor of the day like it is today. And even Cathie in a recent interview has actually alluded to the fact that pullbacks are actually expected. And remember, when you invest in anything, it doesn't matter what kind of investment it is, when it basically goes for the most part straight up, there's a really high probability of it pulling back. And we've actually seen that happen recently with stocks and actually even ARK-K. As of more recently, it's actually come off from its highs. And this is kind of that coming back to reality moment that actually happens with a lot of securities. And it's actually a fairly common phenomenon when earnings tend to start to outpace and when sort of exuberance starts to show itself in the markets. And it's a common occurrence where things actually come back to reality a little bit. How much it's going to come back, or will it overshoot or not to the downside, I don't know. I mean, none of us know for sure. And this is kind of the challenge with investing, period, is none of us can see into the future. So, you know, all I can say is that this is one ETF that I think is definitely worth watching. And Cathie, I think, will continue to be a really interesting person to pay attention to in the not too distant future. Until next time, please stay safe out there, guys, as I know the vaccination is being rolled out pretty much everywhere these days, and I appreciate your support, so thanks. Take care, bye for now.